Sudan's already volatile north-south peace is yet again in jeopardy as President Omar Al Bashir lashes out at his southern rivals. But with elections due early next year, the president's threats are taking on much more significance. So what are the real motives and what's the potential fallout? Sudan, the elections and the peace. This is Inside Story. Hello there, I'm Kamal Santamaria. Mention Sudan and you're more than likely to immediately think of Darfur, a war-torn region, a humanitarian crisis. But Sudan's a pretty big place, and there's another potential conflict that's threatening the rest of the country's fragile peace, the conflict, this one, between North and South. Now, it is less than a year until Sudan's national elections, and the Sudanese president is now threatening to ban the South's ruling party from the North, opening up all sorts of issues to do with democracy and free and fair elections. President Al Bashir, who is also the leader of the North's ruling party, has accused the South's SPLM of putting restrictions on his party's ability to campaign in the South. The SPLM is of course made up of former southern rebels who agreed a peace deal in 2005 after 2 decades of fighting. They only registered though as an official political party last month. Al-Bashir claims the SPLM are preventing the political process from taking place in southern Sudan.
The South is ruled by military intelligence. This is the 4th year now, and the military intelligence of the People's Liberation Movement is ruling the South. They are carrying out arrests and imprisonments. It's them who penalize and seize property as they wish. All that we demand from the movement is to establish a civil rule in the south of Sudan and to pull out their troops from the villages and towns in order to restore normal way of life in the south. If the movement believes they are cutting the South off the political process while enjoying freedom in the North, I tell them we will reciprocate, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth.
Right, we're going to spend a bit of time now explaining the North and South situation in Sudan because it's quite involved. And we also need to look through the prism of national elections to put it in a bit of context. First, though, the map. Here it is, Sudan, an enormous country, 1/4 the size of the US, with its national capital. There it is, Khartoum. Here's the demarcation line, though, between North and South. The South actually has its own administrative capital. That's in Juba. That has been the case since 2005. Now, the electoral history, because this is long, but actually quite sparse. Sudan hasn't been to the polls for 23 years. And as you're going to see, that government didn't even last long. Now, it was 1986 when Sudan last held an election, that vote resulting in a coalition government. But 3 years later, there was the bloodless coup led by then Colonel Omar Al Bashir, resulting in 4 years of effective military rule before he made himself president in 1993. What followed, though, was 12 years of unrest, then supposed peace deals, then ceasefires, then more unrest. It kept going on until a landmark deal came in January of 2005 between the government and the southern rebels. This one, Comprehensive Peace Agreement, CPA, you're going to hear more about it in a moment. It included a permanent ceasefire and agreements on wealth and power sharing. Following that, in July of 2005, the former southern rebel leader John Garang was sworn in as Sudan's first vice president, and a constitution was signed which gave a large degree of autonomy to the south. In fact, that degree of autonomy was so large that a southern autonomous government was actually formed in October of that year, 2005, very busy. And as you can see, the two sides have managed to work together and make concessions in the past. Which brings us to the current political situation. National census in 2008, big step towards the democratic elections scheduled for February of 2010. And as agreed in the peace deal, Southern Sudan will hold its referendum in early 2011 over whether or not it should remain as part of Sudan. Now, if you're still with us, we're going to go back to the CPA, which we talked about, the Sudan Comprehensive Peace Agreement. It is just that, a peace agreement, but with 3 contentious points which go to the very heart of the North-South tension. First, the armed forces. Now, during a 6-year interim period, units from both the North and the South were supposed to form a big force, 21,000 strong. And it was supposed to be deployed in sensitive areas, Abyei, the Blue Nile State, the Nuba Mountains. These would be separate commands. But if after that interim period, those 6 years, the South decided it's not going to break away, then the sides had to unify. So there's one contentious point. Secondly, the autonomy issue. The agreement says the South will have its autonomy again for those 6 years, to be followed by that referendum we talked about. This actually resulted in the establishment of the government of South Sudan under the leadership of John Garang. And third is the oil wealth issue. Of course, it's going to be an issue, but it is to be shared 50-50 between the government and the SPLA. Now, before we get on with the discussion, you're going to hear a lot of acronyms in this show. You've heard a few of them from me already. I'm sure our guests will mention them as well. So we just want to remind you really, really quickly here. The NCP, that is the ruling National Congress Party. That's Omar Al Bashir's party. The dominant force in the south, that is the SPLM, the Sudan People's Liberation Movement. They're your two major groups. There's also GOS, the Government of South Sudan, which you might hear, and finally the CPA, which we just covered, the Comprehensive Peace Agreement. We're going to work through it all now with our guests. In Khartoum is Yasir Arman. He is a spokesman and Deputy Secretary General of Sudan People's Liberation Movement, the SPLM, of course. In London is Edward Thomas, an author and Sudan analyst at the Rift Valley Institute, and he actually just returned from Sudan yesterday, working on a report on southern Sudan. And also joining us from Khartoum is Safwat Fanos. He is a political scientist at Khartoum University and a member of the ruling party. And it is with you, Safwat Fanos, that I will begin. Basically, you've got the ruling party wanting to ban the SPLM in the north because the SPLM is apparently violating freedom in the south. Now, to me, it doesn't seem the most clever of reactions because the government is basically threatening to do to the SPLM what it says it's doing. It's just as bad as the other.
Actually, if one looks at the relationship between the two partners to the CPA, that is to say the NCP and the SPLM, during the last 4 years since the agreement was signed and implemented in January 2005, one finds that the relationship has always been characterized by working relationship on the one hand, but also tension and struggle on the other hand. The tension and the struggle, the source of it is the attempt of both parties to get the best out of the agreement to their own benefit. And this is not the first time that the two partners air on to the public, on air, their differences on different issues. Now, the latest conflictual issue between the two partners is relating to the forthcoming national election, and specifically to the results of the national census, which said that the number of the southerners in Sudan represent 21% of the total population. This percentage was disappointing to the SPLM and to the southerners in general, who believe that their percentage of the population is more than 30%. Now, this is important because it has repercussions on the power sharing and wealth sharing. On the power sharing, for example, the number of the geographical constituencies are determined by the percentage of the population in the census. So if the census concluded that the percentage of the southerners is 21%, then the geographical constituencies in the south will represent 21% of the total constituencies in the National Assembly.
Right,
so it is just an example.
Their representation
also, it will reflect on the number.
Sorry to interrupt you, because I just want to get a reaction, because we of course have Yasir Arman, who is from the SPLM, and you've put forward some arguments there, and I want to get his reaction. You dispute, as we've just heard, they're disputing the number of people in southern Sudan as according to the census. What are you basing that on, and is that what is leading to all this problem?
Well, before that, let me comment on what President Bashir was saying. It is strange, and it is actually odd and serious for the president, who is supposed to be the president of the whole country, to threaten part of the country and to say openly, if there is a violation of the constitution in the south, I'm going to violate the constitution in the north. And he's talking as if he's talking to another state, as if he's not the president of the whole country. I could have understand if President Bashir says that I'm going to call the presidency or I'm going to go to South Sudan and to discuss the issues he's talking about. But President Bashir is actually, what he's saying is not new. He is planning to put more restrictions and to go ahead of controlling the upcoming elections. And the National Congress now is doing a lot of work trying to pass laws that are contrary to the Constitution and that would restrict the movement, the right of expressions, and all the Bill of Rights that came into the constitutions. And they are trying to control the political life. Right now, there is a heavy censorship in the press and the newspaper in particular. And the security agencies are arresting, torturing even members of the SPLM, the Sudan People's Liberation Movement, which is a ruling party. And the National Congress actually is a problem for them that they are not accepted in South Sudan. They don't have supporters. And the SPLM is being accepted, having supporters all over the country, in the north and in the south. And the National Congress...
Let me get then, I'm sorry to interrupt you, because I want to bring Edward Thomas into the discussion as well, has been waiting for us in London, get maybe an analytical view from you. And it goes back to that original question which I asked. Both our guests have just pointed out what they say each side is doing. They just seem to be as bad as the other, and both holding back the political process, which has been held back already since 2007.
Well, I think it's important maybe to go back to where you started the programme with the Comprehensive Peace Agreement, which is, in some ways, it was an astonishing act of pragmatism by both parties, the southern-based SPLM and Omar Al Bashir's National Congress Party, where they agreed to, in a sense, keep each other in power for a number of years. In order to deal with wider problems in the country thrown up by the long war that they'd fought with each other. I'm not very... I looked up the speech on the internet. I believe it was given to a party forum, and perhaps the speech itself needs to be interpreted in the light of that and the audience that it was directed at. I think the speech is important because the parties may choose to approach the forthcoming election by prolonging their alliance and thereby keeping the peace agreement on track until 2011, until the big day of the referendum. Or they may be bargaining over the nature of the electoral alliance next year. Or the alliance itself may be under threat. Which may make the elections a more open to different possibilities, but would certainly make Sudan more volatile if that happened.
We're discussing the North-South rift in Sudan today with our guests, Yasser Arman in Khartoum, Edward Thomas in London, and also in Khartoum is Safwat Fanos. And at this point, gentlemen, we really need to look forward and ask the question, what happens if this rift continues? There are a few scenarios which we're going to work through. February's elections could be postponed, which would of course in turn postpone any referendum on the South's future. There could be a renegotiation of the Comprehensive Peace Agreement, closing the loopholes that both sides say are being abused. But what most fear, even if either or both of those options are taken, is another all-out civil war, as there are many other tribal groups and militia who may be unhappy with any agreement. Safwat Fanos in Khartoum, I'll come to you. This vote has been postponed, if I'm not mistaken, since July of 2007. That's when the CPA said it was supposed to be. So it's been postponed at least 2 years at this stage. Obviously, that would be completely unacceptable to have to postpone it again, particularly with the referendum coming after it.
Okay, before I answer your question, let me just comment on what Mr. Arman have said. The President was not talking, he was not addressing the nation as the President of the Republic. He was talking in the headquarters of the National Congress Party and addressing party supporters on the occasion of the Shura meeting. So this is very important to clarify.
Okay.
Now, the options open, or the scenarios you are talking about, first of all, the Constitution said that the election is to be carried out by the end of the 4th year of the CPA, which is July 2008. Now, because of the delay in the approval of the electoral law and the delay in the composition of the election commission, which is responsible for implementing the electoral law and carrying out the elections, and these delays, one would say, was the responsibility of the two partners, because they have the majority in the Council of Ministers and in the National Assembly, which is the two bodies that approve the laws. But because of the delay, we ended up with a situation whereby the Electoral Commission said that the earliest time possible for having the election will be February of next year, February the year 2010.
And are you confident that date will be met?
Now, if the problem over the national census is not solved, then I am afraid that the Election Commission will not be able to meet the deadline of the election process, the nominations, the complaints, and everything by the time they have decided, i.e. next February. So it is very important for the continuation of the CPA and the stability of Sudan that a political solution is reached regarding the results of the census. My opinion is that census, although it has its technical side, but it also has its political side, its political repercussions. Especially in countries that are multi-dimensional, multi-ethnic, multi-religious, multicultural, etc. By comparison, look at Lebanon. In Lebanon, the census is carried out every year. The demographic structure of the country has changed, but nevertheless, everyone agrees that the Maronites are the majority, and therefore they have the presidency. I'm just giving it
okay, fair enough.
For comparative purposes.
So what you're saying is that the
now,
CPA
this is where
goes
the
to the very
political
heart.
dimension come in.
The CPA goes to the very heart of all that happens in Sudan at the moment, particularly political and elections. Yasir Arman in Khartoum, is there any room for that CPA to be reworked, renegotiated in light of the problems, or would that be a dangerous path to go down?
Let me first comment on what my friend Safat was saying. President Bashir has not to forget that he's the president of the country, whether he's talking to his ruling party or in any forum, and he's threatening to violate the constitution, which is already being violated by him and by his party. The other thing, there is no room at all for the CBA to be renegotiated, and constitutionally there is no any relation or link between the election and the referendum. The election in the constitution, both parties, they have the room, and they are allowed by the constitution to agree to postpone the elections. But I want to reiterate our commitment, our full commitment in the SPLM for the election to be carried on. But the referendum, it is in 2011, it is in January. It's supposed to go ahead. There is no renegotiations. The interim period is 6 years, and everybody has to be committed for that. We have been at war, and we ended the war in a peace agreement. We want to end the peace agreement with another peace agreement, permanent peace agreement, and we don't want anybody to violate this agreement. And as you know, in Sudan, there have been many peace agreements have been violated and by the different ruling parties, be military or others.
Definitely. Edward Thomas, let me come to you in London. After hearing those two arguments, if you like, I want to ask you what you think the likely scenario is. Where to from here? If the CPA has to stand as it is, if we really want to get these elections away in 2010, especially given the referendums due in 2011, something's got to give, doesn't it?
Well, certainly Sudan faces an enormous number of challenges. at the moment. But sticking to the CPA is probably the option that is going to cause the least number of problems out of the available options at the moment. So I think it will be very difficult for the partners to manage the incredibly complex set of processes which are preconditions for the election. There's technical problems around the census and the border demarcation, but even more than that, there's enormous political problems, and these issues will all be solved through political deals, not by not by improving the technical capacity of the two sides.
So is that third scenario? Sorry, is that third scenario which I mentioned earlier? Is that a possible reality, a return to civil war or a battle of some description, given that this is not just about the SPLM and the NCP, it's about a lot of different groups who may not agree with either of those two parties?
Well, God forbid. I mean, it would be terrible if there was a return to civil war. But I think one of the things about Sudan is Sudan has historically been a state which is authoritarian but weak, and it is therefore at risk of fragmentation and at risk of things going wrong, and it deals with fragmentation very violently. That's always an option. It's always an option in Sudan, that the situation will get worse and it will get bloody. What you have at the moment is a set of political processes which are under extreme pressure, which are constantly being challenged every day, but which are still alive, which have some kind of mysterious resilience about them that keep them going in spite of threats from both sides, in spite of all of the roller coaster of Sudanese political life. The CPA is still going, and I think it's very important for both sides to show patience and commitment to the agreement.
Safwat Fanos in Khartoum, I've only got about 1 minute left, so I'll have to ask you to be brief. Just want to get from you, there is a commitment to the CPA, is there? Because our other two guests have said that is the most important thing, hanging on to the CPA, commitment to the CPA.
I am convinced 100% that the two partners have commitment to the peace process and to the CPA. And what we are seeing now is political maneuvering from every side to try to get the best deal for itself. But there is no doubt in my mind that the CPA gets the commitment of the leadership of the two political parties. There is no doubt in my mind that the Sudan army will never go to fight in the south again and keep the country united by force. President Al Bashir is quoted more than one time that if the South wants to become independent, he will be the first one to congratulate the new state. If that happens, and I wish it will not happen, but in case that happens, we are all hoping to have peaceful relationship between two friendly neighboring countries. But no one in the north is now targeting or willing or aiming to keep the south part of Sudan by force. The southerners have the full right and the freedom to choose in the year 2011 what they want to do for the future of their people.
And we will keep a close eye on it. My thanks to Safwat Fanos there in Khartoum, also Edward Thomas in London and Jazeera Arman in Khartoum. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us for Inside Story, and also to our viewers, thank you for joining us. You can send comments and suggestions if you want. Email them to insidestory@aljazeera.net. But from the whole team, it is goodbye for now.